What's up, everybody? Corey Hughes Bloody History. We are back. Sorry I took yesterday off. I was at 4 days of Fish concerts, and so I needed to take yesterday to recover. But we're back. We're going to continue on with some, well, I want to say continue on with some Jack Ruby, because that's really what we're doing today, but not really. We're going to learn more about Jack Ruby by going through the testimony of Eva Grant, who is Jack Ruby's sister. It is this sister who requested sometime in the 40s, possibly 47-ish, 48-ish, I think before 48, requested that Jack come down from Chicago and work in her nightclubs. Let me see. He had the Vegas club. I think it was called the Silver Slipper. The Silver Slipper, if I'm not mistaken. Because there's that other one that was run by Mac Manuel called the Silver Spur. Oh, no, it was the Silver Spur. The Silver Spur. Or I don't know. It was one of those two. Well, I'm sure we'll get clarification from Eva Grant, so don't take it from me. We'll take it from Eva Grant herself. This testimony of Eva Grant was taken 2 p.m., July 25th, 1964. In the office of the U.S. Attorney, 301 Post Office Building, Bryan and Hervey Streets, Dallas, Texas, by Mr. Burt Griffin, Assistant Counsel of the President's Commission. Mrs. Grant was accompanied by her attorney, Mr. Phil Burleson. Mr. Ernest Connor was also present. I'm going to skip some of this preamble and the oath and all that stuff because we don't really need to see all that. Excuse me. So, she gives the oath, and Mr. Griffin then says, this is where we'll begin. Would you state again for the record your name? My name is Mrs. Eva Grant. Ms. Grant, where were you when you heard the president had been shot? I was sitting in my living room. Was anybody with you at the time? Not at that time. How did you get word, over radio or television? Pauline Hall called me on the phone, and I believe it was shortly. Pauline Hall called shortly after 12:30. At least I believe it was that, and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Nothing." She said, "Turn on your television to Channel 8, and I did. She said, "Do you know that the president has been shot?" I thought it was, wait a minute, well, I did remark about the fact that someone is passing it around to make it look bad, like, do you hear some things? How did you continue to watch television, or how long did you continue to watch television? Well, I had watched it earlier that morning. Wait, I knew he was going to be in town, and I watched him on television on Channel 5. I think he was eating breakfast in that Texas hotel, I believe. How long did you continue to watch television before you talked with anybody else after Pauline called you? Well, wait a minute. I had it on, it seems, most of the time. I think that I went into shock or something, but I had it on, I think. Even if I didn't have it loud, I had it on. A lot of times I have the picture on and the voice real low. Now, think back to this particular day after Pauline called you. Did you go about your housework, or did you watch television? Well, if I remember, I had just been out of the hospital 9 days, and I wasn't doing anything outside of trying to prepare some food if my friends downstairs didn't bring me up something. Most days she saw that I had a hot biscuit every day. It was something else, whether it was dinner or breakfast, or if she thought I wanted something. Try to think about what you did. Now let me ask you something. Do you want me to go back up until the time I got up? I simply want you to tell me everything after you hung up the phone with Pauline. Did you sit in front of your television set until you next heard from somebody else, or did you do your housework, or what did you do? This is what it seems to me. We talked about 5 or 6 minutes. I kept on talking, and I may be confused about this minute because I just couldn't accept it. And it threw me off guard, and she said, "I will call you back." But we talked, and it seems to me, he, meaning the TV, kept talking about different things, and I may be wrong, but it seems to me a federal man or security man, truthfully, I had not heard anything about the governor. I don't remember now. By he, you mean the person on television. On Channel 8, at the time he wore glasses, it seems. He had black hair. After Pauline Hall called you, who did you next speak to? Seems to me she was on 3 or 4 times. Wait a minute, Jack had called me, but it seemed he called me after 1 o'clock. Did you talk after Pauline called? I talked again to her about 3 times. Either I called her or she called me. I wanted to see if she had news from another station. Did all these telephone calls occur before Jack called you? Yes. Now, did anybody else telephone you before your brother Jack called you? Now, she may have called me. The girl's name is Emma Collins, who worked for us as a waitress. I think she came in on weekends. I remember she wasn't working for a couple of weeks because I was in the hospital. It seems she may have called me during that afternoon. Whether she called me before Jack or after, I wouldn't put my life on that. But almost 1 o'clock, I was listening to the best I could to Channel 8, and I heard this man say distinctly, "The president is dead." I know I don't want to even think of that. I don't know what happened. I kept listening, and I don't even know what he said. I don't remember security or the governor, or I don't remember anything anymore. I kept listening, and it seems to me another 3 minutes. Even time didn't mean anything because I don't know. I just don't know. He said it's not official, so I kept hoping. I threw myself into a fit, and I have never done the crucifixion, and I don't know which way is proper or correct, but I thought if it would help him, I feel, and, well, it would just help him. And he kept talking, and it seemed to me that he said the president is at Parkland Hospital, and Pauline and I talked again, and she said I have to hang up. She wanted to call some friends or her daughter, and it seems to me, I already heard it, might have been 20 minutes later. This time, a fellow says the president is dead. She starts crying, and it seems to me Jack called. Now, Ms. Griffin, let me explain something. I've been very sick, and I was taking pills, which I showed Leon Hubert. No, someone came to my house recently. Clemens. What's the name of that fellow? An FBI man. And Hosty. Hosty? Hosty came by, and I showed him the pills. I think there were 24 originally, and I didn't start taking them till a few days before. I don't remember. I think the pills were given to me around the 15th or 16th of the month. I took some, and I had called Dr. Aronoff and Dr. Bukatz. He was his associate, somebody. After I had taken the pills, I called the nurse, either Bloom or Blum or something like that, and I told her these pills put me in a trance. I'm stiff and I can't think. And she said she had to cut down to one every 4 hours. Let me interrupt you a second. I want to keep you on track. I want to explain. I was taking these pills. I had taken one that morning. You were taking pills, and that is when Jack called you. No, I had taken one early in the morning and went back to bed and took one about 4 or 5 hours later before Pauline called me. Did Jack call you before you heard this man on television who said he thought? Yes, he talked to me earlier in the morning. When I say early in the morning, it could have been 10:30. Now, after you learned the president had been shot and you talked with Pauline Hall, did you then talk with Jack before you heard this man on Channel 8 or after you heard this man on Channel 8? No, I heard the man first because just as this word Jack said, "Isn't that awful?" Was Jack talking to you about the fact the president had been shot, or did he mention that the president was dead? I want to tell you something. He assumed that I'm listening because he had spoken to me earlier in the morning, and he said nothing about this ad. Don't forget the ad, even before this. We can go back to that, but I want to. He assumed, and I assumed that each one knew. When he called me, I had an idea. I tell you the truth, I thought he was in the morning news. I don't know, I thought he was. Did you ever have the feeling that the party wasn't home? Was there anything you heard over the telephone which indicated he was in the morning news? Well, the background, I mean, like I've heard it before, maybe. After all, I heard it many times. I don't say someone came and talked to him at the morning news or announced themselves. Okay, so let me comment on this real quick. So this is great because what we're doing is we're continuing. Holy shit! What we're doing is we have a Jack Ruby line of action in chronological order. That what Miss Grant is doing is continuing to confirm the alibi of Jack Ruby, right? So remember, Jack Ruby's original story is he shows up at the Dallas Morning News at around 11 a.m. to put an ad in the paper and deal with talking to these people about some stuff and whatever. What he's really doing is he's creating an alibi because it's not fucking Jack Ruby, all right? Jack Ruby will be in the green pickup truck that is seen by Julie Ann Mercer, right? And so he'll be doing assassination stuff, right? Picking people up, dropping people off, doing that kind of stuff. He'll end up at Parkland Hospital about 1 o'clock, right? But remember, we have this person, Samuel Ruby, in the background of the Dallas Morning News broadcast, which is occurring. I always thought it was around 12:40 p.m., but we know that it's sometime between 12:35 and 12:45. Let me put it that way. Okay. So from the Dallas Morning News, the broadcast, then you see Jack Ruby in the background on the phone. But it's not Jack Ruby because the man there has a left index finger. And Jack Ruby doesn't have a left index finger. Jack Ruby's left index finger was bitten off in a bar fight in like 1961 or 60 or something like that, right? So Jack Ruby didn't call her from the fucking Dallas Morning News, right? This is all alibi stuff because Jack was out doing other stuff, assassination stuff. So it was Samuel Ruby who called her, not Jack. So, let me continue. You indicated that Jack called you on an earlier occasion that day. Absolutely. All right, what time of the morning was it that he called you? It seems it could have been 10:30, 11, or 11:30. It seems to me, still before Pauline. He called you before you knew that the president had been shot. Yes, at 11 a.m. Now, let me ask you this. Let me explain this. We have a lot of daily talk about the club, and our conversation was mostly about the club. The first conversation, it was about the club. All right. Now, in that first conversation, did he mention the advertisement that had been run in the morning news? He said about 3 words. Did you see the ad? Did you see the morning paper? And I said, yes. All right. Now, in the second conversation, did he mention the advertisement in the morning news? The second time. Now I'm going to tell you when he came over, he was already in a fight. I'm not talking about when he came over. The second time he telephoned you. Yes, he mentioned the ad. That was shortly after you heard the man on television say the president was dead. Yes. Now, you had a telephone conversation which you thought was made from the Dallas Morning News. There was evidence that it was made from there. Did Jack say anything? That's a weird statement to make, isn't it? Shouldn't she have just said yes? But no, she's saying there was evidence that it was made from there. She's reiterating that point. She's providing an alibi for Jack Ruby. That's what she's doing. You know, I've never met John Newman personally or over the phone or anything. I was carrying on, so I said, you better come here. He said, listen, I knew I wouldn't be able to get through to him. His mind was wandering. I don't know what you have in mind. I want to know what he said. He said, the telephones are ringing like mad. He said, people from all over the country are calling up and canceling their ads. Big companies, and this is what he said. And John Newman did not put it in his statement. Jack went over to this fellow, and this fellow came to the phone because I heard him say hello. He said, this is my sister, and she is hysterical. I heard my brother say that to this guy. What did you say? I wanted to tell you with Jack. Tell us what you heard Jack say to somebody who apparently was coming over the phone. Now, you know, whether he repeated this in the house later on over the phone, I know this, Jack, knowing my brother. I know he can't control himself like I can, which you probably know. He said, what the hell are you so money hungry? And the guy said to this Jack, well, you know, Jack, I take orders from my superiors. Griffin then says, did you hear the man say that over the telephone? Seems to me I heard something like that. But it could have been something Jack said to you in the apartment later on. Could have been, although I know he said later on that he was so steamed up. About how long did that telephone conversation last with Jack? Well, 10 minutes would be exaggerating. Might have been as little as 5. Could have been. It wasn't 3 minutes. It was from 5 to 10. I don't know. Mrs. Grant, how long after the telephone conversation did you then either hear from Jack or see him? I would say now it seems to me this phone call came in about 20 or 25 minutes after 1 because I already heard it. And don't forget, and it seems to me I heard it in 10 minutes. And I see you can't depend on my timing that day. We're not going to. Just let me worry about that. Okay. Now listen now. I want to find out when it was next that you either heard from Jack or saw him again. I said over the phone, you better come here, and I don't remember even what my last words on the phone were. Did you receive a telephone call from him before you saw him again? This time was around 1:30, we assume. You mean from anybody? No, from Jack now. I don't think so. This was the last because I said to you, you better come here. After the telephone from the morning news, your recollection, is that the next thing that you saw him? Before 1:30, that was the call, and one other call in the morning, and that was it. That was before 1:30, and we will say 11 o'clock or 11:10 or quarter of 11. Now, after 1:30, when did you next hear from him or see him? He came over, and it may have been an hour and 15. That's what it seems to me. Would it be as much as 2 or 2.5 hours? That was later. No, he came over because I said, you better come here, and he knew how sick I'd been. And when he came over, did he have anything with him? What are you talking about? The first time he came to your apartment on Friday afternoon, he had the newspaper. Did he have any sandwiches with him at that point? No. Now, between the time that he showed up, going backward at the time that he called you from the morning news, had he telephoned you? Not from that last phone call. Do you have any recollection of his telephoning you from the Carousel Club on Friday? Yes. Now, did he telephone you from the Carousel Club between the time he called you from the morning news and the time he saw you at your house? Mr. Griffin, if you don't let me tell my story my way, that is, what this whole I told him he'd better come. I was sick. I was so sick. I had a major operation and I felt I was going to fall apart. I don't know what was happening to me over there. I just can't explain it. I was operated, and then let me tell you, on November 7th, so you figure, and the other doctors know about what happened. He came over and didn't stay long. He seems to me he stayed 5 or 8 minutes or 10 minutes. He did not stay a half hour. He said, what do you want? I said, will you get something from the delicatessen? And he said, I have to go back to the club. He said, well, did you read it? And I said, yes. He left. Now, I assume he called me from the Carousel, and I actually assume it was about an hour later maybe, or even an hour and a half. So I said, when are you coming? And he said, well, I will go over to Phil's Delicatessen. And I said, where are you? And he said, I'm downtown. I said, listen, I would rather you went to the Ritz, which is down the street. They have better food. They have fresher and better variety. He said, I'm coming right over. His right over came. I would say it was after 4 o'clock, maybe quarter of 5. Maybe it was 5. Maybe it was even 5:15. Could it have been as late as 5:30 or 6? It wasn't after 5:30. What makes you think this? Well, we were waiting for the 6 o'clock news, and it seemed to me that there wasn't enough news on there. But as a rule, as little as I stay home to listen, I know there is a 6 o'clock news. But by that time, I heard already a policeman was shot, and he probably heard it where he was. And I remember watching television, and that afternoon, it seems to me, this man was Curry. Said, we got the right man. He had 3 draft cards and a bunch of stuff. He defected. This is what it seems to me in my mind. If I could get the tape and I was still tuned to Channel 8, Jack came in with enough food. If I understand you correctly, when he came to your house at 2:30, at that time you mentioned to him to get some food. Yes. Then he went down to the club and called you from the club, and again you mentioned to him to get the food. Because he called me to see how I was. Had you had lunch that day? Well, you can't call it because my breakfast is coffee and cookies or something like that. The neighbor could have brought me up a sweet roll. Her name is Betty Goodman. She's done things like that and has been very kind. Was anybody else at your apartment when Jack came back the next time? Unless it was Betty. I'm sure she came back when I started screaming over the telephone. The president is dead. Did you call her on the telephone to tell her? No, Pauline Hall called her and said I'm having a fit or something. Then did Mrs. Goodman come up to your apartment? Yes, she was up much earlier. She came up, I think it was 10 o'clock. That's how I got the paper, because I don't get the paper. After Pauline Hall called and said you were having a fit, did she come up again? Yes, she stayed, and well, she thinks I'm very emotional or something wrong. She's of a different temperament, and she said, do you think you'll be all right? Now, after that, my brother came up. But Mrs. Goodman came up to your apartment after you learned that the president had died. Sometime, I would say, very shortly. How long did she remain? Not too long. I think 5 minutes, 5 or 7 minutes. Not long. How long after Mrs. Goodman did Jack arrive? This is the first time you're talking about. It could have been about an hour. Could have been about 40 minutes. It wasn't 3 hours. Could have been 2 hours. I think it was a terrible day. How could anyone? I can't remember. If you can't remember? Listen, this was not a normal day. First of all, I wasn't watching the clock. I wasn't watching for anything. When Jack came back to your apartment for the second time, what did he have with him? Enough groceries for 20 people. What did he have? How many grocery bags did he have? He went down to the car to get another load of it. You figure it out, 6 big bottles of pop or whatever you call it, a pound of corned beef, pound of tongue. He had 4 meats, a pound of each. Did he have a pound of lox, which is a smoked salmon and some smoked fish, and he bought onions and oranges and a variety of 6 different kinds of cakes. Were they things that he would have gotten at the Ritz Delicatessen? All but the vegetables. He bought the vegetables and fruit. Did he tell you where he got those? I didn't ask him. Did you have a grocery store that you regularly shopped at? He liked the Safeway. Was there a Safeway somewhere near the Carousel or between the Carousel and your place? There is one on Lemon Avenue, not too far from Oak Lawn. What was the name of that store, do you know? Well, I live in that neighborhood. I don't think he ever lived in that neighborhood. I don't know where he could have gotten it. I knew where the cakes and things come from because this particular place makes or handles several. Where did the cakes come from? They have little biscuits, and their rye bread's entirely different than any other place in town. Where did the cakes come from? From the Ritz Delicatessen. They carry stuff like that to go. Was there anything that you noticed that he brought back that you could identify with any other store? He had a newspaper, the Times Herald, had the president is dead. How long did he remain in your apartment on that occasion? I know it was around 7:15 or 7:20 when he left. About how long? I'd say a good 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. Did he receive any telephone calls? Yes. All right. Now let's try to think about how you are going to organize this because I want to take it chronologically. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you because that day wasn't exactly a good day for me. Before you start to talk, try to think a little bit about what you are going to say. He got some telephone calls and he made some. That's correct. Now try to think who he called first or who he heard from first and how that progressed. He wasn't at the house 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes at the top. He was on the phone. I think it was Andy. I'm going to tell you this. So Andy is Andrew Armstrong, who was working for Jack Ruby at the Carousel Club. And he's somebody I've honestly put so disgustingly little time into, I'm almost embarrassed. Jim, let's see if we can't pull everything on Andy Armstrong. I'm going to tell you this. Why do you think it was him? I didn't answer the phone. He wanted the scrambled eggs and lox. Who's he? My brother Jack, and I heard the conversation. What did you hear? Didn't you get a number from him? Yes, I got it. And he said, call me back if you find the number. May I say something? Yes, go ahead. I bawled my brother out for buying so much food, and he said, that is not much. And I know it was at least enough, not exaggerating, to feed 12 people, but he did know what he was doing then. And I said, I bet you spent $25. He said, no, only 22. Oh my God, 22. You couldn't buy the lox alone for 22 today. Well, it was no sense of making discussion. Remember, this is money. This money times 10, right? So if he spent $22, it's $220, right? Jack Ruby had a lot of money. He had $2,000 on him when he went to jail, which is $20,000 of today's money, right? Well, it's no sense of making discussion. I said, now you're going to take some of this stuff for you and George. I mean, George Senator. Don't leave it around here. And I said I didn't feel like eating, and he said, I don't feel like eating either. And I said, you better eat, because he hadn't eaten anything since early in the morning. And I said, what do you want? And he said, some scrambled eggs. Did he tell you where he ate breakfast that morning? No, haven't the least idea. Andy called me back and he ran. He was practically in the bathroom. I have a very small apartment. If you want to take a diagram, you can practically carry your phone in there and close the door and still hear. And he ran to the phone. He knew I was busy. I was moving around very slow, not in my normal speed or stride. If it was only 4 feet, I wasn't trying. I did better than a lot of other people. But he took a number down and he called this number and said, Jack Ruby, I heard something, but I don't know. He said, yes, I'm closing tonight. I don't know what the other guy said, but Jack had told me this after he hung up. Now, this may have been the first conversation or the second. Seems to me he talked to him twice. I'm just assuming this. Jack said, you know, the Cabana and the Century Room are closing, but the rest of the clubs aren't closing, or something to that effect. That the other clubs weren't closing. Whichever ones they were, I don't remember that he mentioned, but he mentioned that 2 that were closing. I don't know what went on in regards to the clubs and things, but Jack said this, he wants to know, and he was sitting there, and that is when I could see there was something wrong, but I couldn't detect what it was. He became a really very broken man, you see, but I figured everybody looked and acted like he did, and I, not being out, I don't know what other people outside of Pauline or the other people that called. He said, Don wants me to call him and let him know if I'm going to be open. This is almost the exact words he said, as much as I remember. And he said, listen, we are broke anyways, so I'll be a broken millionaire. I'm going to close for 3 days. I heard him go back to the phone, but then I was in the bedroom for Kleenex or something. He went back and dialed. I don't know who he talked to. And he says, well, this is what I heard him tell. I don't tell the Weinsteins that I'm closing, Don. He said, yes, I want to be closed. And he seemed to be, when he come out, we talked a little bit about our family and things. I said, call the printing room. Of course, I'm not familiar, though. I shouldn't say this. I've heard it a million times. I'm not familiar with the newspaper, although I've been there many times with him. I said, you better cancel your ad. He said, well, I'm going to cancel the ad for 3 days. Truthfully, he tried to cancel the ad, but they said they held the space for him. I don't know which paper it was. He said, this is Jack Ruby. The other guy knew him. Oh, no, he mentioned the composing room. He said the composing room. He said, this is Jack Ruby. Do me a favor. Listen, use my space and say, closed Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then he waited. Let me interrupt you here, not because you're doing very well. I'm trying to. Well, let me ask you this. You made the statement that Jack initially called simply to cancel the space. No. Andy called our house. Listen to me. Andy told him Don called. Jack bawled him out why he didn't have the number and says, I'll get the number. But we have about 5 phones in the place of business. Andy must have went to the other part of the club to get the number, and he called back. I got that. What I'm referring to is after Don Safran, S-A-F-R-A-N, called him, and you and he talked, and you said, Jack, you better call the printing room. And then he made that telephone call. And I think you indicated, Jack said, I want to cancel my ad. That's Jack's original thought, was to cancel the ad, not to use the space. Yes. What do you remember was said that indicated this to you, makes you remember? Seems to me, and I was sitting right next to him on the couch, and the way my place is, there was a little white table, and there was a telephone there, and it seemed to me, he said, I'd like to cancel. And the guy says, well, of course, you couldn't hear the man on the other end? No, I assume the ad was already paid for. Go ahead. What else happened in that telephone call? As I said, you better call the printing room, or did you call the printing room, or something? Jack said he knew the department better than I did. At least he was thinking a little better. He said, you mean the composing room? The fellows there know me real well. And Jack said, Tom, something. And then he said, well, put in closed Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But I want to explain something here. He made 2 calls like that. And from what Jack told me later on, he said, well, the first edition, it will be out like Friday night. The space and the wording is in the paper. What newspaper did he call from your house that afternoon? He called both of them. And after he made these telephone calls, what did he do? Well, he tried to eat. By now, the eggs were cool. He took a spoonful or a forkful, and he went back to the phone, and he took his phone into the bedroom, and it seems he called Alice Nichols because, that's the girl he was engaged to. What? What? Who in the goddamn fuck is Alice Nichols? Jim, we gotta get to the bottom of this. All right, so let me continue in my fucking shock and awe here of this person I've never goddamn heard of. How have I never fucking heard of her name in the Kennedy assassination? What the fuck is going on? Are the stars out of alignment or something? Shit. God, I might be losing it. Let me interrupt. Do you have a recollection of his making a telephone call to Alice Nichols from your house? Well, it seems to me it was that day or the next day, but I think it was that day. I'm going to keep this in mind. Let me ask you some other questions before we get to Alice Nichols. When he brought the sandwiches and so forth, it wasn't sandwiches. All right, he didn't have any made-up sandwiches from the Ritz Delicatessen. No. When he brings stuff for me, he don't usually do it that way for us. Do you remember his making any telephone calls to inquire about the synagogue? Yes. Did he make that telephone call before or after he called about canceling the ads? It seems to me the call to the synagogue was later. It was before or after he talked to Alice Nichols. Seems to me it was later. Which was later, the call to the synagogue? Seems to me the call to the synagogue was later. The next thing you remember is talking to Alice Nichols. Let me explain this, Mr. Griffin. Did you ever feel this girl and him, there had been a very fine relationship, respectable, and I have noticed in the past, and I think I have heard this name for 15 years, and in this time they were engaged, that during tragic days or something very exhilarating, he called Alice Nichols And when my brother talked to her, it's sort of a secret. He took the phone into the bedroom, and I had all reason to believe, and believe me, I did not hear anything mentioned like Alice or dear or honey. I had a feeling he was talking to Alice Nichols. What made you feel that? I couldn't help it. There was something about when he talked to her. Did you hear anything that was said in that conversation? I don't know whether this is in the back of my mind or knowing him, or whether I actually heard him saying something to her, but I have all the reason to believe that was the first call because he jumped up from his eating. I told you for each call, and it was he didn't eat. He ate less than a third than he normally eats. I don't know if I'm imagining this. I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, but there was something in his voice, or I may have heard, at least it is in the back of my mind that he talked to her. I may have even heard her name, but I don't want to say. Later on that same night, we talked about her, and this is what bothers me. Whether it's in the back of my mind, he told me that, or did I hear him say, Alice, it's Jack? Did you hear him make some telephone calls about going to the synagogue? I sure did. Tell us about that. Let me just stop to get to the place and time. About how long after he made the telephone calls concerning the cancellation of the ad did you hear a call about the synagogue? Maybe about an hour or 45 minutes. He walked up and back a couple of times. He took the phone in the bedroom. He made another call in there. And I want to tell you what I heard him say. That I heard him, I am sorry, and I'm calling you so late. I didn't hear too much of their conversation, but to say hello to Jean. Who's Jean? This girl named Jean Hamblin. She's married to Cecil Hamblin. They have one little child. Now, this could have been around 6:30. He'd already been to the table 3 or 4 times. I remember Andy called twice. I remember Don. Oh, wait, I told you about Don. He called twice, didn't he? Yes. Okay, I know he called the composing room. Wait a minute. When Andy called back and he called Don, now it seems to me that he already talked to Alice Nichols. I mean, it may have been before Andy called and he wasn't in the house too long. What makes you think that he had already talked to Alice Nichols? Well, I think he used the phone. Or had he mentioned to you that he already talked to her earlier in the day? Seems to me that I heard that too, but that he would be nothing to him. That it would be nothing to him. I know it would sound crazy. My brother has called me when I'm not sick 5 times a day. I mean, there are times it's not an everyday occurrence, but there has been times, it seems to me, that he said he had called her. How long did he remain? I'm going to be honest about this. Alice is a very cold person, a very fine person, but I could never get to talk to her, as even to this day, and I have known her for years. I never sort of pushed conversations like, how is she? What is she doing? Yet I knew he had a great liking for her. You indicated earlier that he had been engaged to her. Was that actually a formal engagement? Oh, yes, he gave her a ring. Now, after he talked with Cecil Hamblin, did he make any other phone calls that you remember? Seems he called Dr. Jacobson, Coleman Jacobson, who attended the same synagogue. Jim, let's get everything on Dr. Coleman Jacobson, please. Mr. Griffin, let me see if I can help you with this. Do you recall Jack saying in the telephone call to the doctor, well, do you recall after Jack made that telephone call to Dr. Jacobson that Jack actually called the synagogue? He did one or the other, but he did call both. You understand the whole deal. I got to tell you this. All right. Dr. Coleman Jacobson and Stanley Kaufman are supposed to be his friends, and they used to bawl Jack out that he didn't come Friday night, which was the thing to do. My brother, when he called Coleman Jacobson, and he often apologized, and I heard this mentioned, and I'm not a big synagogue goer, because Friday and Saturday night is the time we do business. I know it's not right, but I know whether Coleman Jacobson told him to call the synagogue or he called the synagogue, but I did hear, I know he made both calls. About how much time elapsed? Between the 2 calls, it could have been an hour. How much time elapsed from the time that he called Cecil Hamblin until he left the house? Not more than an hour, but maybe 45 minutes. All right, was this telephone call to Cecil Hamblin the last one he made? No, I think it was before the other 2 calls. I mean, I think that. In the period shortly before he left your house, what was he doing? He was sitting in my golden chair with his head in his hand, and we were talking. I said I never thought in my lifetime I would ever hear of a president being assassinated. I thought when they do those things, when McKinley was shot in Garfield, I said barbarians were running around. Were you doing most of the talking, or was Jack? Yes, he was quiet. He sat in the chair and he said, really, he was crazy. And between that time, he went into the bathroom and threw up. It was after he ate what he considered eating. He didn't have much to eat. No, because he asked me for some scrambled eggs, and I made him 3 eggs. He wanted the eggs. I said, I'll make you 4. And he said, if you don't eat it, I'll eat it. I know those eggs. He ate 1/3 and just about very little of anything that was there. So the amount of food he normally eats, he's a pretty good eater, even with his diet. Did he tell you he called Eileen? Yes, it seems to me he told me that. What did he say about that? Now let me explain something. You see, you're jumping the gun. When he was sitting on this chair and crying, I had made this remark. Don't forget, I saw all this business on television already. This was now after 6, maybe even after 6:45. He left shortly after 7, so it can't be 7:20 or 7:25, and so we can straighten that out. I said, that lousy commie. Don't worry, that commie, we will get him. I also said this. I say the word commie low. Does it go in there when I say it? I would like to see the television deal in order to get something straightened out. Seems to me Curry, he said, had 3 draft cards and had defected to Russia. This was all in the late afternoon, and he kept repeating it. I figured out in my intelligence that this guy was sent to do it. So I said this. I could never conceive of anybody in his right mind who would want this president hurt. Only a guy just of this caliber. Lousy commies. L.H. Oswald. What did Jack say? He didn't say nothing. I heard him say, what a creep. Whether it was Friday or Saturday. That's the exact term. It was Friday. He never used the word rat or skunk. He doesn't like my vocabulary. I come out and I call his friends SOB. But you want the word. He don't like them, and that don't have to go on the record. Did I get off track? I'm sorry, Mr. Griffin. Well, when did you see him again after that, after he left the house Friday night? The next day he came. Did he come back to your house at all Friday night? No, wait a minute. You're asking me. I know what the question is. Now I'm sorry, sir. You'll have to forgive me. My mind isn't that good anymore. When he was leaving, he looked pretty bad. This I remember. Can't explain it to you. He looked too broken, a broken man already. He did make the remark, he said. I never felt so bad in my life, even when Ma or Pa died. I said, well, Pa was an old man. He was almost 89. Anyone lives that long, you're lucky, such as the life he lived. I can't put the things in there, the things that I said. That's all right. Mrs. Grant then says, I said I don't want anyone to get killed. I said if it was Hoover, now he's a man 85 years old, and I read a confidential report out of some magazine, he has the same thing my father had, uremia. I bet he would almost, or wish someone would shoot him. I know how my father suffered. Don't misunderstand me. Let him live and be well. That's not a thought on my part. It's a thought on this poor man who's been suffering so much. Did you tell this to your brother? Yes, I think we were discussing, we were very close in saying things. This was before he went to the synagogue. During the time he was eating and phone calls and all those little conversations that go up and back. Did you see him again that night after he left? No. When he was leaving, he already threw up, and I was very worried about him getting killed in traffic. I said, don't go to the synagogue. He says, yes, I got to go. He said, I will never feel right. Did he tell you when he left the house he was going home first? This is what, he was too dirty. He never wears clothes, the same clothes all day. If he has to go out in the evening or go into a club and he wasn't dressed right, it seems to me his tie was loose or whatever it was. I don't even remember. I think he wore a gray suit after he left home. He got home. You didn't hear from him again, did you? Yes, I did. Did he call you when he got home? Yes. He called you from his house? How long after he left? About an hour. What did he say? That is when he said to me, I told Eileen you were going to call her. I told Eileen you were going to call her. When did he say that to Eileen? How do I know? He told Eileen in Chicago that I was going to call her that night. Did you call Eileen? Seems to me I did. You want to know my records would show better than I can. You know, you talked with Eileen. Yes, but I don't remember when I talked to her that night, Saturday night, but I'm almost certain it was that night. And I want to tell you what happened in the conversation. I said, you know, Jack wanted me to call you. I guess he called you. Such a tragedy. And how do you feel? And she said, I want to send you a robe. And I said, I don't want nothing. I got flowers to bury me, and I would like to be buried away. I'm just sick about this whole thing. And we were talking, only I didn't speak so hectic as I am now. I was pretty low and sick physically. I said, I'm going to call over at Mary's. That's Marion Ann Hyman, and Mary lives at 1044 Loyola, Chicago. She said, when you call over there, tell Hyman, my older brother, he left his glasses here. So I said, you're in Chicago. Why don't you call him? Kidding her. And she said, no. I think I called that night. You look and see. It seems to me I called. Did you leave the apartment at all that night? Never. Now, somebody made a telephone call early Saturday morning from the Vegas Club. That wasn't right. That is a confusion. I billed it to the Vegas Club telephone unless one of my help went there, which I doubt. But I wanted to call my son's father-in-law, which I straightened out with the FBI. That was call made to a family named Hirsch. I don't think I made it Friday. I think I made it Saturday. The record indicates it was made somewhere around 1 o'clock or 12:45 a.m. Saturday morning, and the records indicate it was from the Vegas Club. I would like to doubt that very much on the words. Let me explain something. What about the other two calls? Are they Friday? Do you have it there to Chicago? The phone company has written a letter to me stating that the call was made from LA 66258 at 10:45 p.m. Someone made a call late Friday night to Hyman's number in Chicago. Wait a minute. Let me tell you what the record shows. The record shows that Eileen called you around 9 o'clock. She called me? That's right. Maybe that is right. See, I don't know. See, oh my God. See, at this point, I know. I've been suspicious, but now I'm convinced she's completely full of shit. Right? Completely full of shit. She's covering for Jack and Sam, and she is guilty by accomplice after the fact. I know I talked to her. You want to know the truth? I know I talk to them once or twice a month, so I don't know. Do you remember calling Hyman? Seems to me I remember calling that number over there. You don't remember exactly when you called? Seemed to me it was Friday. Well, the records indicate that a call was made to Hyman's house from the Vegas Club on Friday night. Did you go out of the house? Never left that house, never. So I hope I don't see my son alive. I did not leave Friday or Saturday out of that building. Not until Sunday when I was sneaking over to what I thought was City Hall. Let me explain this. Do you remember calling the Hirsches? Yes, but I think it was Saturday. Please listen to me. It was Saturday, November 23rd. I had called another number where my son lives. It's in my book. And calling my son's number, maybe it was 10:30 at night, Dallas time, and nobody answered. This was Saturday night. I decided to call Cecil and Verl Hirsch. That's the mother and father of my daughter-in-law. And I said, it's Eva. And we talked, and I told him the town is falling apart over this, and we're just sick. And I said, where are the kids? And I figured maybe Cecil's not answering the phone. And he said, they're here. And I said, how come you're having an affair like this? She said for 3 or 4 different weekends, they were supposed to have a temple affair, and they were installing new officers. It started in September, but it is a new community, and all the mothers and fathers have young infants, and every other week, if they postponed it, a child had measles or chickenpox. And they said this particular Saturday, November 23rd, let's see if everyone can't come. We will install them whether they are there or not. And I said, you tell Ronnie he's not to take the kids out of bed. Not that my kids listen to me, but that is me talking. And to stay there overnight, and maybe I will call them tomorrow or something. Anyway, I said, don't let them take the kids out. And she said, I told him not to. She said he was going to drive up at 12 o'clock sharp. And I said, where does he get this traveling 40 miles and another 40 miles from my son's mother-in-law and comes back to where they live? Let me move ahead now. It's Saturday morning. Did you see your brother Saturday morning, November 23rd? I don't remember. How about Saturday afternoon? Did you see him Saturday afternoon? Yes, I did. I spent every bit of 3.5 or 4 hours. Not 3.5 hours and not much more than 4 hours with him. What time did you get? Remember, that's not possible because Jack Ruby was down in Galveston. So it must have been Sam. And she's in on this, remember? She's covering up for everybody. What time did you get up Saturday morning as best you recall? Well, it would be easiest to say that I didn't sleep at all. Let me just ask you this. What time do you think your brother came to your house? I would say 20 minutes before, and I think it would be the closest I could ever get. 20 to 4 in the afternoon. Saturday, November 23rd, and it could have been 5 to 4. Had you contacted him? Between the time that he left on Friday night and the time he showed up Saturday afternoon, I think one time. When do you think he called you? I don't know. It seems to me I may be wrong. He didn't call me early in the morning. It seems to me he called me now. It wasn't before noon. This I will swear, at least I can't remember. He called me enough after 4, after 8 o'clock to make up for all the calls he didn't. One call, I think he was in the club, and I would say after 12 o'clock, but I don't know when. I don't know. I'm just assuming that many times. I never know where he is at. I don't question about where he's at. It don't make any difference unless he's in the neighborhood. Like Friday, I might have questioned him when he said he was going to Phil's. I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm in the club." I'm going to get here. I'm going to get on for a second. Do you remember calling a man named John Henry Branch on Saturday, November 23rd? Me? Yes. Do you know who Branch is? Yes, I know him. Gee, I don't know. I have called him a bunch of different times, but I don't remember talking to him. Do you remember trying to make some arrangements with Branch about getting a piano player? Yes. When did you do that? I don't know. I was having trouble right along. I believe it was Friday, November 15th. Was that after you went in the hospital or before you were in the hospital? Well, Joe left the first week in November. I have called Henry Branch. I think it was before my operation. Now that you brought it back to me, I don't remember calling him that Friday or Saturday unless I wanted to show some people because I had a piano player. Leonard Wood was working for me. He was the piano player. But he quit you fairly soon. But he was working then because I wanted to tell you what happened. He called the house. Now listen closely. Leonard Wood called the house. He brought up that I have all the reasons to believe it was Friday night. And he said, "How do you feel, Mrs. Grant?" You know one thing about colored people, since I've been sick, most of them were very nice, even if he hated me. I know if I got them mad like Joe, and we still loved him. I don't know what it is he had called, and I had reasons to believe it was Friday night. Now listen to this. He said, "How do you feel?" Now I may have called him and told him not to come into the work, or Jack called, or someone told him. Who called the personnel at the Vegas Club to tell him not to come to work? Did you make any calls to your personnel at the Vegas Club? Pauline was calling me at the time, and Emma Collins, and I am glad you brought it up. I can't think of every damn thing. Leo Torti is our helper or manager. He does many things, and we owe him some money. It wasn't we, Ralph Paul. Anyway, it seems to me, the best of my knowledge, he had all their mobile phone numbers, but it seems to me I myself may have called Leonard sometime late that afternoon. I just don't know. All right, and that right there is exactly the halfway point. So we're going to call it here for today, and we're going to pick it up here tomorrow where we'll wrap this up. See, obviously what's going on here is they're trying to dig into her for the timeline of what Jack Ruby was doing, right? Because there's some contradiction. And why is there contradiction about what Jack Ruby was doing? Because Jack Ruby was seen in two places at the same time, all the fuck over the place. He was being impersonated by his brother Samuel, who was creating alibis for him all over. So if you'll remember, I said that I believe that Samuel was the brains behind the operation. But that's it for today, guys. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in.